Chair, I think we're ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'm not sure who's going to lead us in the flag salute this morning.
Yeah.
You can.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a flag out towards the front of my house, so I'm going to stand up and turn. If you're participating remotely, please mute your microphone for the flag salute. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible.
Yeah.
Sorry, something happened with my mic. Hello?
Hello.
We can hear you.
You're on.
Okay. I apologize for that.
Morning, this is John Baca, Commissioner.
We can hear you and see you, I think.
Oh, I lost it.
Can
Chair,
we the request the secretary to call the roll?
Chair Klein,
Yes.
Vice Chair Andrioli,
Present.
Commissioner Baca,
Present?
Commissioner Condon. I don't believe he's here yet. Commissioner
Condon's here. He's on mute.
Oh, Commissioner Condon's there. Okay. Commissioner Davis,
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Saktava,
Here.
and Commissioner Williams.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Terrific. Does the city clerk, do we have any changes to the agenda?
There are none.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move. Davis.
Second? Baca?
Thank you.
Motion by Commissioner Davis, seconded by Commissioner Baca to approve the agenda. I'll call the roll. Chair Klein,
Approved.
Vice Chair Andrioli,
Yes.
Commissioner Baca,
Yes.
Commissioner Condon,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Saktava,
Yes.
Commissioner Douglas.
That's Williams. Yes.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Williams.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, great. Now we will take public comment from members of the audience. If you'd like to provide public comment through Zoom, please click the raise hand button. And at this time, the public is encouraged to address the commission on any matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Business and Industry Commission. The public will also be given a chance to comment on matters which are on the posted agenda during commission deliberation on those specific matters. Is there public comment?
Chair, there are no raised hands.
Okay. We will now go to the presentations.
Item number 1 is update on MetroLink Union Station project. And Public Works Director Wall will present the item. Is Dan on?
Good morning, Commission. The MetroLink Union Station project will have or potentially has impacts on streets in the city of Vernon, and a presentation is going to be made by Metro staff.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Danielle Valentino with LA Metro, and I'm in our community relations group. And we're here today to support our Metro Regional Rail team and, of course, the City of Vernon and your BIC. We really thank you so much for inviting us and allowing us some time to work with us over the last several weeks. We know that we met with you a little while back, and you gave us really helpful feedback into how we can proceed with the city and the BIC and your business stakeholders to better understand the Link Union Station project, specifically the potential impacts that may come from proposed improvements on the 46th Street connector, as well as on the 49th Street. So today we will walk you through those proposed improvements and walk you through how this area may be potentially impacted. And our goal today is to make sure we really hear your feedback, your concerns, your comments, so that as we develop our environmental process further, we can incorporate your concerns and get back to you with further information. Next slide, please.
So before we begin, Danielle,
Yes, introduce the team.
yes, I'd like to kind of say a few words, if you don't mind.
Of course, Jeanette Owens is our Senior Executive Officer for Regional Rail, and she is leading this effort. Jeanette, please.
So good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Happy New Year. The last time we met with you was in September. And so I want to make sure that we thank you for inviting us to give you an update on the Link Union Station Malabar Yard improvements. We also wanted to thank you for the valuable comments you provided us when we last met in September. We have earnestly worked in addressing all your comments. And as you recommended, we made it a priority to meet with the businesses that will and may be impacted with our proposed project. We started to meet with them since October 2020. Some of the businesses we have met up to 3 times, where we actually made changes to the project with the overall goal of minimizing the project's impact. To further our commitment to closely engage with the city of Vernon, we also held a business stakeholder meeting yesterday evening to go through the project again and walk them through the preliminary traffic analysis in which we will present to you today. So with that being said, I want to turn this over to Vincent Choi to kind of walk through the comments that you've had and how we intend to address them. Thank you,
Thank you.
Danielle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you, Danielle. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present this update, Commissioners. Vincent Chiu from LA Metro. We would like to go through a quick recap of the comments, the great comments that we received at the last presentation to your commission. We have a few slides here to go through that. Here on the slide, we basically try to summarize the traffic related comments that we received. For example, how will the closure of the 49th Street impact traffic? We really need to look at ways to maintain access to businesses in the area, and we have to consider how trucks will be accommodated in our proposed improvements, especially the loading and unloading activities. We really need to take a look at the Bandini Downey Road intersection and see, how that is being affected, if at all, by this project. What we have done over the last 6 months is, we've worked closely with city staff, including Dan. Thank you for the introduction, Dan, to develop a preliminary traffic analysis along with proposed traffic improvements to address the potential impacts from the closure of the 49th Street and the 46th Street track. Metro has also, in response to some of the feedback from property owners, we've come up with new design options for both 46th and 49th Street that actually reduces impacts and maintains improved access to businesses. We really spent our time with one-on-one meetings with property owners to better understand their loading and unloading requirements, and we've incorporated those into our design approach. We also completed a traffic queuing analysis and the Bandini Downey Road intersection as well. In terms of comments that we received at the last meeting in the environmental and outreach area, we were told loud and clear that we really need to engage the Vernon community in a very meaningful way, in addition to the typical notifications, and we've done that. Like Jeanette mentioned, we've had 21 meetings with property owners, some with multiple times over the course of several months in order to really engage and get really good feedback from the property owners and stakeholders. We also had a question about how will the project impact noise and air quality. As part of our environmental process, we are preparing these technical studies, which will be released for public review when the draft environmental impact statement is released to the public. And we anticipate we'll be able to do that in the summer of 2021. We are working with California High-Speed Rail Authority. They are our NEPA, Federal Environmental Lead Agency, for the environmental document. A few more details as far as our outreach effort. In addition to the one-on-one meetings, we did host a virtual public scoping meeting on October 8th. We've also made available a virtual open house on this address above to allow public to more easily assess the information. Like Jeanette mentioned, we held a virtual business stakeholder meeting last night and really had a good dialogue with some of the property owners in the area. On this slide, we're trying to summarize the comments we received regarding safety and security. There's a lot of concerns about trash and graffiti within the railroad properties. The concern there also is when we close 49th Street, it could attract homeless encampments, and there may be additional security concerns there. Lastly, how will the proposed railroad improvements affect pedestrian safety? So what we've been doing is we've been coordinating with BNSF Railway to try to implement design features that would minimize the collection of trash and debris along the railroad right-of-way. We've had some ideas there that we'll share with the city staff, and we're working to incorporate those into our design process. Metro's also been working with city and BNSF to really improve safety and security within the existing railroad properties. On 49th Street, we actually came up with a design concept that we'll get into a little bit more as far as, how can we better utilize 49th Street with the project. In terms of pedestrian safety, the existing railroad crossings and the new railroad crossing that we're proposing will include enhanced safety features such as railroad gates, warning devices that will help improve pedestrian safety in the area. With that, we would like to walk through with you the presentation that we provided last night. There's a lot of updates to the project that we'd like to share with the commissioners. So let me just try to step through that. And then the bulk of this agenda that we conducted last night was on traffic update, which I'll have Pat Gibson, our lead traffic engineer, to go through that shortly. A very quick overview of the Union Station project. Today, the Union Station tracks, they terminate on the southern end of the station by where the US 101 is. And that itself created an inefficiency in the operations. Trains, and specifically Metrolink and Amtrak trains, because of the stub-ended configuration, they are coming into the station just from the north side. So they have to come in to the station and then back out the same way as they came in. And this configuration has been in place since the original date of the station was opened back in 1939. What Link Union Station project is all about converting the stub-ended track configuration to a run-through track configuration. The project will transform how regional rail service, and that includes Metrolink and Amtrak, how that service will operate in Southern California. The way we do it is by increasing rail capacity by building a new bridge over the US 101, which will allow the tracks to connect up between the station and the main line on the river. On the west bank of the river, that's where the run-through tracks will impact existing BNSF storage tracks. There's roughly 5,500 feet of storage tracks that will need to be removed as a result of the Link Union Station project. We've been working with Vernon closely to come up with ways to mitigate and offset that impact. After considering several locations in the BNSF network, we concluded that the BNSF Malabar Yard in the city of Vernon is the ideal location to do so. The need for that is, again, to restore and offset the loss of storage track capacity here on the West Bank. And also that will allow us to preserve the current level of freight operations in this region. On this slide, we're trying to pinpoint how geographically these improvements are related at Union Station and Vernon. Number one is, again, the resulting impact of the new run-through tracks is a loss of storage capacity on the West Bank Yard here on top. In Malabar Yard, we're proposing two components: the closure of 49th 9th Street grade crossing, as well as the new track along 46th Street. And what we're trying to cover on this slide is the need and the purpose of these two improvements. On 49th Street, we're proposing to close the crossing there, which will allow BNSF to store freight trains over the existing street and also fully utilize the southern end of the yard to store longer trains at this yard. On 46th Street, what's shown in orange is the extent of the new track, which is about 1,000 feet long. That basically complete a gap that exists today on 46th Street between the existing spur tracks that are already in existing condition. So what this new track connector is going to do is to allow BNSF train to travel in between BNSF Malabar Yard, as well as BNSF Los Angeles Junction Yard that is further of the east here. We wanted to educate folks as far as what we mean by an at-grade crossing. Although many of you are familiar with the topic, we want to really make sure that it's clear. These are pictures from the existing conditions that has tracks crossing existing streets. At the track crossing on Pacific near 46th Street, there are actually crossing gates there today. We're looking to implement the same type of crossing gates on 46th Street corridor where no gates currently exist as a safety enhancement. Here we want to give you an overview of our stakeholder engagement to date. What's shown in this map is a total of 25 properties that are in the 49th Street and 46th Street corridors. We've been able to meet with 21 property owners over the last several months, with some owners up to 3 times. We have actually tried our best to reach out to every property owners, whether it's dropping notices on the door, on the mailboxes, or trying to get our email addresses, send them email for invitation, mailing letters to the physical addresses, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have to go through all of the details here, but this is really to show that we've done our best to try to engage as many stakeholders that are interested in the projects as possible. And we've had close coordination with city staff since last April on this project. When we engage the stakeholders, this is the track option that we discussed initially. This is the concept, what we call option 1. This is the concept that was first presented at our public scoping meeting back in October. What's shown in red is the new track along 46th Street. We've received a number of concerns from the property owners that we met with. This is a listing of the type of comments that we received. The primary concerns are how will this new track impact existing driveways, access to properties, circulation in the area, parking that is either on site or on the street. How will loading and unloading be affected by the track? I mean, all the typical issues that you would expect to hear from the property owners. And then, one of the main concern also is, given how close the red line, this new track is to 2 existing buildings on the south side of 46th Street, the concern of the need for demolition of buildings, property takes, as well as, the level of train traffic that will be proposed on 46th Street. Is it going to block access in and out of the property? Is it going to create a significant traffic problem? How will access for emergency vehicles be impacted by this new track along 46th Street? We actually want to take a deeper dive into some of these comments to really demonstrate our understanding of the concerns. First, we want to start on the 46th Street and Pacific Boulevard intersection. So at this intersection, there is an existing track that goes along 46th Street. It crosses Pacific Boulevard. Some of the concerns that we heard from property owners include we need to be able to maintain access to the buildings in the area. The left turn going southbound on Pacific to eastbound 46th Street needs to be maintained for truck movements. At the property on 4580, there is a 24/7 medical clinic that we need to make sure that we maintain access to it around the clock. Further east in the corridor, most of the comments we receive are regarding potential need for building demolition. Again, how do we maintain access to businesses and properties, customers? Pedestrian safety is a top concern. Further east on 46th Street, we have a proposed median on 46th Street, which will enhance safety at the grade crossing. There is a concern that that new median could block access in the properties. Now we're on Seville Avenue. At the 4620 Seville, there is an approved development project. The concern there is how will our proposed project impact the proposed development there, access, on-site parking, et cetera, et cetera. And we have been coordinating closely with that developer on their proposed plans. So in response to all the comments we received, we've worked closely with BNSF to come up with a new track design option. We call it design option 2. What's shown in this map in orange is the original alignment that we proposed during the scoping meeting. In blue is the new track alignment that is further north of the original alignment. That's what we call it, one the southern alignment, the other the northern alignment. Going back to the original southern alignment, this map shows the number of driveways that would potentially be impacted along 46th Street. The 3 black dots are driveways that would require to be closed as a result of option 1. In option 2, we're actually able to restore access to 2 of the driveways that was shown on the other slide. So on this option, there's one proposed there's a closure of 1 existing driveway on 46th Street. So that's an improvement from the original option that we had. One thing that I really need to emphasize here is since in this track option, it is further to the north, we're able to avoid impacts to 2 of the existing buildings on the south side of 46th Street. I hope you can see my cursor, but these 2 buildings now will not need to be demolished. However, since the track is now further into the street, there is additional impact to on-street parking on 46th Street and the need to restripe 46th Street as a result of this track alignment. We also provided an update as far as how the operation of trains will look like on 46th Street. In our previous conversations, we had provided an estimate of 8 trains a day that will run along 46th Street along this new track. After working closely with BNSF, we really pinned down and refined the operations requirement for this track and the movement between Malabar Yard and Los Angeles Junction Yard. So at this point, we're confident to say that the operation would only be 2 trains a day, one in the early morning going westbound. The second train will be in the mid-afternoon going eastbound. What this map shows is the number of trains in the existing condition and new and future condition at each of the 4 grade crossings in the area. I'm just going to go through one example. At Pacific Boulevard here, today there are at most 2 trains per day. Granted, the 2 trains a day is a really conservative estimate. There are occasions there's only 2 trains a day, maybe twice a week or once a week. The proposed condition will be an increase of 2 trains a day, so a total of 4 trains a day at that location. In terms of train length, we've also refined that. Previously, we've estimated that the train could be as long as 7,000 feet long. With further discussion with BNSF, we know that the trains is most likely going to be 4,000 feet long at the maximum. Train speed is 20 miles per hour. Again, that's a maximum conservative estimate. And there will not be an increase in number of trains between the opening date through 2040. Switching over to 49th Street, we also have received a number of really helpful feedback on the original option. What this map shows is the original concept for an offset cul-de-sac, a cul-de-sac that would be offset to the south side, thereby impacting a portion of the property on the south side of 49th Street, west of Malabar Yard. The concerns that we heard are related to access, driveways, truck operations, on-street parkings. On the east side of Malabar Yard, the proposal was to close it off for public access because of how short that segment of the street is and difficulty for large vehicles to turn around that area. We also received a number of comments from property owners. I'm going to just give some examples on what we heard. On the west side of the yard, properties that are north and south side of the street, they have very, very similar concerns. For the property on the south side, the concern has to do with the loss of parking on site, the ability for the existing loading docks to continue to function. How do we accommodate large trucks that will need to either do the loading and unloading, as well as just being able to turn around at the end of this dead-end street? Property owners on the east side have a little bit of a different concern. They're concerned if our project is going to encroach into their properties. There is also a desire for additional public parking in this general area. So on the east side of 49th Street, we actually came up with two options to how to repurpose the existing short segment of the street between Hampton and Malabar Yard. This first option is to stripe parking up to 13 spaces on the north side of 49th Street. The second option includes a concept that will restripe the street, providing up to 16 parking spaces on the south side of 49th Street. Again, these are concepts that we came up with to really better utilize this dead-end street to really minimize the potential for trash and homelessness. So in response to the comments we received, we came up with a new option 2 for how we would reconfigure the end of 49th Street, west side of the yard. We came up with a concept called Hammerhead. What's shown in blue is the footprint of the Hammerhead. And this is a result of ours performing truck turning analysis to make sure that we can maintain all loading and unloading operations to the loading docks in the area. What we're also able to do is to reduce the amount of parking spaces that is required to be taken on the property on the south side of 49th Street. As you can see, the footprint here into the property has been significantly reduced. On option 1, which was where we started off during the scoping meeting, there are 3 driveways in the area that will need to be modified. We can maintain access, but they need to be modified. In the Hammerhead option, we actually can leave the existing driveway on the south side of the street as is, even though the 2 driveways on the north side will also need to be modified. With that, I'd like to pass the mic to Pat Gibson, our traffic engineer, to step you through the traffic analysis. Pat?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Gibson. I'm with Gibson Transportation. And we're working with HDR on the traffic study to evaluate the impacts of the project on the business district in Vernon. And there are really 2 impacts. One, where does the traffic go when we close 49th Street? So there's a reshuffling of traffic, and what are the impacts of those traffic changes or movements? And secondly, as we add 1 train in each direction to the 46th Street corridor, what does that do to queuing and delays and operations? So I'm going to take you quickly through the traffic study that's been done so we can look at the effects and the improvements that we're proposing. This is the study area we're looking at: Vernon to Fruitland in the north-south direction and Santa Fe to Soto east-west. The blue streets are all of the streets that we studied in the analysis. The blue dots represent the intersections that we looked at and performed capacity calculations for. And the yellow dots you're looking at are all the different driveways we looked at to make sure we understood what the potential effects of traffic and train queues might be on those on those driveways serving the existing buildings. So next slide. One of the concerns was clearly lots of traffic from this study area has to get to and from the 3 freeways serving Vernon and serving the area. The Vernon, Santa Fe, and Leonis are the major corridors getting traffic to the freeways. This project is not going to have any impacts on those routes. So what we really wanted to do is make sure that we could get all of the internal traffic to and from those routes to let them get their freeway access. So I'll show you those localized effects in another slide or two. So here, if we look at that yellow X as the 49th Street closure, and we look at what would happen to routing of traffic if that street was closed, here are the ways in and out of the land uses on the west side of the tracks. So those 3 or 4 buildings would go back to Santa Fe and up and down Santa Fe. To get to 10 or 110, they'd go north. To get to 710, they'd go south to Fruitland, and then east on Fruitland or up to Leonis to get to the 710 freeway. So the access to the projects on the west side of the tracks is pretty straightforward. Next slide. If you're a building on the east side of the tracks and the 49th Street is closed, you can get to Santa Fe by using Pacific, either north or south, or Pacific southbound or Hampton southbound to get to Fruitland and then out to Santa Fe. And if you're heading to or from 710, then the closure of 49th Street doesn't really affect you. You can continue to use Leonis or Fruitland as you do today. So what we looked at and what we wanted to make sure of is that all of these alternate routes were able to handle the traffic that's going to be shifted as a result of closing 49th Street. Next. So Vincent went through the assumptions about the number of trains, but let me just do it once more because this was a very key element that the neighbors or the business community was worried about. First of all, the 46, the 2 east and west ends of 46th Street that hook into the spur tracks, they now get a maximum of 1 train per day. And we heard last night, those trains don't occur every day, and those trains are not really 4,000 feet long. Those are the local serving deliveries and pickups from the businesses along those 2 spurs. One of the business folks said that there's typically just a locomotive and maybe 3 or 4 cars that are delivered in the morning to the businesses along each spur and then picked up in the evening and taken back to the yard. So 2 trains per day. Most of the time they're coming to the businesses early in the morning before 7 a.m. and they're being picked up in the mid-afternoon. Now, as Vincent said, there will be one more train a day, once eastbound and once westbound, that will use that new piece of track we're building. Those two trains, one in each direction, those two train movements, new ones, will get added to the two trains that occur on the spurs every day. So on the two ends, there could be up to 4 train movements per day. In the middle along 46, there would be 2 train movements per day. Those trains would be a maximum of 4,000 feet, and they would typically be moving no more than 20 miles per hour. So what we did is we looked at the number of automobiles and trucks that were using the streets today, and we looked at how long it took to get a maximum 4,000 feet of train going at 20 miles an hour across those grade crossings. And we looked at 6 different grade crossings in the study area. And the conclusion of that analysis, and I'll show you some graphics of this in just a second, the conclusion of those analyses are that when you do get a long train in either of the areas today, either the east or west spur, there are long queues that occur within our study area. And those queues will continue to do so. However, when we looked at the addition of those 2 new trains a day, it didn't substantially alter the existing conditions. So let me show you what we looked at in terms of the 95th percentile queue. So this is the length of cars that we would see at 95% of the time or less. Let me say that differently. I'm sorry. 95% of the time, the queues would be less than this. The blue line represents the current train activity level. So in this case, it's the trains using that western spur, 2 trains per day, 1 in each direction. The orange line shows what would happen if the train activity level stayed the same, but traffic grew from 2020 to 2024. And then the red line shows what would happen with the extra train added on 46. And let me just tell you that both Vincent and I said the railroad told us that those trains typically come by before 7 a.m. and they get picked up and brought back between noon and 4 p.m. So they're moving really off peak. Now we understand that most of the businesses in this area open well before 7 a.m. and they are open well past 6 p.m. Some of them have their busiest hours of the day before 7 a.m. However, when we look at the activity of the businesses in the area and add the commuter traffic, the background traffic, excuse me, that operates on Soto and Santa Fe and Fruitland, the overall busiest times of the day for traffic is 7 to 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon. So we said, what would happen if those 2 trains a day or 4 trains a day occurred in the morning peak hour and in the afternoon peak hour? What's really the worst case condition here? What if that delivery train in the morning didn't happen at 5 a.m., but instead it happened when traffic was busiest at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning? So all of these analyses represent the 2 to 4 total train movements occurring in the morning and in the afternoon peak hour. So that's what this red line represents. In this case, 4 trains operating at 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon peak hours. So let's move
Excuse
to
me,
the next.
Pat?
Yes.
Pat, are you able to kind of make a quick synopsis of what you found in your analysis so that we can continue on with the meeting?
Sure. Let me just, again, almost all of the queue locations look like this. There's a slight difference. Let me just run through these real quickly and just show you. Here's the 46th Street crossing east of Seville. Next, there's the Seville Avenue spur crossing, which again happens once a day in each direction. Next, here's the new crossing at Seville and what the maximum queue would look like. Next, here are the intersection improvements that are locations where we have impacts. And let me show you what improvements we're going to make. Let's go right to the slides. Here's Vernon and Santa Fe, where we're putting in a right turn lane, changing one of the lanes to a right turn lane and putting a green arrow in so that the right turn can move on 2 phases of the signal and clear out that line of cars. Next, at Pacific Vernon and Santa Fe, we're going to restripe the eastbound for dual lefts to help get that line of cars cleared. Next, Pacific northbound at Fruitland, we can stripe a right turn lane in there and help process more cars and trucks through that intersection when the light is green. And lastly, next, Fruitland itself would be restriped for 2 lanes so that we don't pinch down to 1 lane and we can store many more cars so that when the light turns green, we can empty traffic onto Santa Fe. So those are the main traffic conclusions. Victor, Vincent, I think it's you're going to take over and talk about schedule.
Yeah, just quickly wrapping up our presentation here. We're going to continue meetings with property owners one-on-one. There were 3 meetings already set up from our meeting yesterday, so we're going to continue to do so. We'd like to provide an update to also the Chamber of Commerce next week. Our next steps include in the environmental process, our next milestone is the release of a draft environmental impact statement for public review. That's currently scheduled to happen this summer. We're going to continue to advance the design to further our understanding and incorporate feedback into the process. Construction timeline is TBD for the purpose of environmental analysis. Construction will start as early as 2022, subject to funding availability. We would like to end here by saying that based on the feedback we heard, we'd like to recommend what we call a preliminary preferred alternative. For 49th Street, we like to recommend option 2, which is the hammerhead configuration because it provides better access. It takes fewer parking spaces. For 46th Street track connection, we like to recommend option 2, which is further north into the street because it avoids the taking or demolition of 2 buildings. It improves access also to properties in the area. We like to recommend this to our board as early as this April for the preferred alternative to be considered. I think that basically wraps things up. Right now, we are between step 1 and 2 in our environmental process. Hopefully this summer, we'll be able to release a draft environmental impact statement after we've completed all the required meetings and outreach in Vernon. With that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Chair, if I might, thank you, Metro, for providing this presentation. I appreciate it and apologize for the dog barking in the background. But I did have a couple of questions in relating to the traffic analyses. I think one of the big things that I think is part of this project is also that the increased traffic and connection with the Downey-Bandini intersection, which is already an absolute nightmare for anyone along the Bandini corridor. I know that you guys mentioned it early in the presentation, but you didn't bring it in the traffic analysis and study. So I have a question on that. And then number two, I know you guys stated that the peak hours were kind of that morning and afternoon rush hour. But if you also drive around in Vernon around lunchtime between 11 and 1, you'll see a ton of business traffic as well as the normal truck traffic in and around the city. I think that's something that you guys missed in that Q analysis as well.
All right, let me respond to that quickly. We did have a slide on Downey and Bandini, but we were trying to shorten it up a bit. We did do a full analysis at the intersection of Downey and Bandini. That intersection today operates at level of service E. So like grades in school, A through F, E is not so good. So Commissioner, you're absolutely right. That's not a fun intersection to drive through. We added the shifted traffic around the project does not actually add much traffic to that intersection as a result of the traffic shifts. So when we did a volume to capacity ratio, that intersection would still work at level of service E after the project went in. In terms of the peak hours and the lunchtime activity, we did do 24-hour counts. So we've got counts every hour of the day throughout the day on the major blue streets in the study area. And it was pretty clear that 7 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock, 7 to 9 and 4 to 6 were the busiest hours of the day. And it's really not projected that we're going to see train activity in the lunchtime hour. It's before the morning hour, and it's really just before the afternoon peak hour that the trains are expected. So we don't really expect this project, at least the train activity portion of this project, to affect lunchtime traffic.
Okay, and sorry, just to follow up on that, were your accounts taken during COVID or were they taken after? Because obviously having a substantially less number of employees in office in Vernon is going to impact the...
Yeah, actually our counts were taken primarily before COVID started. So we used 2019, early 2020 counts, expanded them up to 2022 and 2024. We did take some counts at driveways. Most of the businesses told us that their activity levels within the study area were pretty close to normal. But we did adjust those counts up to reflect pre-COVID conditions.
Great. And, you know, just following up on that Bandini intersection, you know, I know in terms of the traffic, there may not be impacts according to the trains that you guys are predicting in there, but with that connection with BNSF Railway that you're going to be adding from that kind of west side into that, is that going to drive additional train traffic through there in addition to the potential of the 2 trains that are in this specific project area, but with that general connection that's occurring there? Because frankly, I don't think that intersection can handle any more train traffic as it is. It is such a disruptive event to all of those businesses along Bandini, and I'm sure any residents or pass-through traffic occurring in the city.
Sure, I understand, and maybe Jason can help me here. Jason Sanchez is with the railroad. Jason, do you anticipate additional train traffic beyond the 2 trips a day we're talking about using Downey and Bandini intersection?
No, Pat, I think that's something we would have to look at in terms, because I don't have a good answer for you at this time. That's something we could look at. Now, I will say, just so that we're all aware, the new connector will be actually south of the LA River. So we'll be a little bit further where the connector ties into the existing track in the city of Vernon. It would be south of the LA River and, further away from, the intersection of Bandini and Downey, if that makes sense. It's kind of hard to explain, but it is probably several hundred feet south of the crossing where those two additional trains would cross would be, several hundred feet, maybe 1,000 feet away from that intersection.
What we can do is, as a follow-up to your question, Commissioner, we'll make sure we provide an exhibit and explain that. So you can better understand it. We'll coordinate with Dan and provide you that information.
Thank you very much.
Are there any more comments or questions that you may have?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Baca. I got a question going back to slide 32.
Can we pull up slide 32, please?
I guess you could say, since this is so close to the Super Bowl, this is kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking, but how many tracks are at that crossing? Because, that's a good second idea, the hammerhead, but did they ever think about taking out one track on each end of this crossing? And that would allow for more parking or less footage that they have to take away on the west side for the driveway or for turnarounds for vehicles?
We did run truck turning templates, and that's how we designed the limits of the hammerhead itself. We used the longest trucks that the businesses said they ever get, and that's the limit. The blue lines you're looking at are the limits of what would handle all of the movements from the longest trucks they ever see. Shifting the whole thing to the east into the yard doesn't really affect the shape of that. You're right, it would take a little bit less land from the north and south businesses, but if you look at what's really going on out there, most of that area we're looking at is really their circulation area, and it's going to continue to be that. So I'm not sure it would help much to shift into the yard itself, and whatever shift we did into the yard would mean that we lose an entire track of storage, and that's of course the whole reason for closing 49th Street in the first place.
Okay,
Commissioner, oh, go ahead, Baca, sorry.
Well, I didn't mean to eliminate the track completely, just at that section, between north and south there. You could still have the amount of track storage to the north or south. It's just you'd have a spur line going into the north or south track, or the tracks on the west or the east. You would just eliminate that footage just on the crossing part, that's all. But
yeah, the purpose of really of the 49th Street closure here, because right now with it being open, BNSF is not able to store any trains along this area. So it really makes it inefficient in that regard. That was the purpose of the closure of this 49th Street. The purpose of the hammerhead, I wanted to make sure that the businesses are still able to provide the access that they need for operations. And so the hammerhead is more related to making sure that the traffic circulation serving these businesses continue and minimize any impacts to them. So we believe this proposed hammerhead that we made a change to based on several meetings with these two property owners. And they appear to be very supportive of this new alignment, enhances that. So that's the intent of the hammerhead.
Okay, so they would actually, when you say more storage, are the the cars going to be actually stored right at the crossing, or?
Yes, when we close the 49th Street, trains can actually be stored all the way through. Right now, Jason, can you explain your existing condition on the 49th Street with the 49th Street open?
Yes, Jeanette. So with 49th Street being open, obviously, it's used for vehicle access across the tracks. Now, because of that, per PUC regulations, we cannot store cars within, and I'm drawing a blank on the number here, but I think it's 200 feet of the edge of the crossing on both sides. So we have 7 tracks at that crossing, and we cannot store tracks, or we cannot store rail cars within 250 feet of the edge of that crossing. So you're looking at a minimum of 500 feet of track storage being lost per track, right? So that's where by closing 49th Street, we would gain, approximately 3,300 feet of storage capacity at the crossing.
Okay, so on the construction, is that something that's going to be permanent, or a fencing with a gate just in case something catastrophic happened where they had to open those under emergency, or is it going to be a permanent?
It is a permanent.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions that you may have? If there are any follow-up questions, we'll coordinate with Dan and Diane to address any questions that you may have. We know that we provided you quite a heavy kind of update, but we wanted to make sure that you understand that we take your comments very seriously, and that we want to make sure that we are really engaging with the city of Vernon in a very meaningful way. And so that's why we'll continue to closely coordinate, meet with each business owner, making sure we understand their concerns, minimize any impacts to their operations.
I do have one more question. This
Sure.
Commissioner, on that 46th Street crossing, because I've talked to the guys at the utility there, with this new proposed change. I don't know if they've started to do anything as far as moving utility poles or anything. Is that going to change that plan?
We haven't gone to that level of detail yet. We're
Okay.
still in the environmental process. We submitted only up to 10% design at this stage. And so the intent is really wanting to introduce the project, wanting to make sure that we meet with everyone in all the businesses in the area, really trying to go above and beyond to making sure they understand it, and then really look into addressing it. So once we know and we have an environmental clearance moving forward with a preferred alternative, so that's why we came over to you today. Based on the feedback we have received from the businesses, we are recommending a preferred alternative. We haven't recommended it to the board yet, but it was important for us to present it to you today in case you have any comments with our preferred alternative, so that we can meet with you, address it before we present it formally to our Metro board in April. That was the whole purpose of our business stakeholder engagement yesterday, meeting with you today. We're also going to make sure we meet with the Chamber of Commerce. So those are things that we have yet to work on. Once we have an adopted preferred alternative, we'll go and take that into that level of detail. And again, if you're willing to have us come back again once the design advances, we'll let you know more as we get there.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? If you don't have any at this time, just please, we'll coordinate with Dan and Diane, and if you send it over to them, we'll make sure that we address your comments. With that being said, that's all we have today. Again, thank you very, very much for your, for giving us an opportunity to present to you today.
Thank you.
Chair, if you're ready to go on to item number 2.
Yes, please.
Item 2 is regulation of commercial cannabis businesses, state law authority, local regulation, and policy considerations. And the city attorney's office will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm Arnold Alvarez Glassman, the interim city attorney, and we've been working very closely with city staff and have made this presentation to the city council. We bring it to you this morning. One of the senior partners in our office, Norma Capado, who is very well versed and an expert in the area of commercial cannabis, will be making the presentation. And we offer this to you for your insights and feedback as we move forward in this process and the discussion with the city council. So I'll turn it over to Norma. Good morning, Norma.
Good morning, Arnold. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Norma Capado. I am a senior partner with Alvarez Glassman & Colvin and do serve as your interim assistant city attorney. So thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to provide you with this presentation this morning. We were directed by City Council to provide this presentation to you. I would like to let you know that there were 2 study sessions that we currently had with City Council. The first one was in January 19th and the second one was in February 2nd. So the presentation that you're going to see is a combination of all that information while we try to streamline it. So I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can because it is a lot of information. Please feel free at any time to stop me or to ask me questions. Obviously, we are leaving an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask any questions, but if there's anything specific that comes up while I'm discussing any topic, please feel free to stop me. So this is just an overview of the things that we're going to discuss. I'm going to briefly talk to you about the current state law regulations, the different license and cannabis classifications, what the local jurisdictions are doing and their regulation authority. I'm also going to discuss a little bit about what Vernon currently does and give you some information, concrete information as to what's going on in some other municipal jurisdictions. Also, if City Council moves in the direction of implementing a program and adopting an ordinance in the city of Vernon, based on our experience and based on our work with other municipalities, there are certain policy considerations that we think are very significant in setting the tone for a city's program. And so I'll briefly discuss what are some of the recommendations that we have. Also, as a result of the first study session, there were some specific questions that were raised, either additional questions that we may not have addressed or a request to further discuss some items. So those are also going to be presented to you. So like I said, you're getting the full information that we presented to City Council. So back in 2016, Prop 64 was passed by the voters. And this was for the first time a statutory to implement a state to actually regulate the commercial cannabis activity. As you know, before, it was medical cannabis that was allowed in specific instances, but now a statutory scheme to regulate it statewide was approved by the voters. Just to give you kind of specifics, statewide, 57% of the voters voted yes for it. In LA County, 59.5% of the voters voted yes to approve Prop 64, and specifically in the city of Vernon, 53% of your residents voted yes. There have been a lot of changes throughout since 2016 on state regulations to either clean up some of the things or to streamline it. So as we know it right now, Prop 64 is known as MOXRA, and it's the Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. So again, it was streamlining both the medical and now the commercial cannabis activities into one statutory scheme. And like I said, the intent is to have an ability to regulate it and be able to control it statewide. There are currently 6 general state license classifications that are allowed by the state: cultivation, manufacturer, distributor, testing laboratory, retailer, and microbusiness. Within each of the 6 general state license classifications, there are many subsets. Cultivation is pretty straightforward, right? You have a nursery, you're harvesting the flower. You have the ability to have mix small ones up to large operations. You have the ability to have indoor or outdoor cultivation. If the city of Vernon moves forward in this direction and does allow for cultivation, our recommendation would be to have only indoor cultivation and actually prohibit outdoor cultivation. Manufacturer, I think this is the most broad classification because it includes anything from extracting the cannabis to producing or making edibles, or to extract it or make it into different synthesis in any other form. So typically, especially in a city like Vernon, it's a warehouse where it's all indoors. They're pretty much synthesizing the flower and the harvest of the cannabis. Distribution, this is strictly the transport of cannabis from licensee to licensee. So this is only to operation. Typically, what we see is that the distribution classification is not a standalone classification that is allowed by cities, but it's sometimes as an ancillary used to the other classifications to be able to transport whatever their cannabis products in their premises. Testing laboratory is pretty straightforward. One specific distinction made from a laboratory to the other classification uses is if you have a license for a laboratory, you're only allowed to have that use. You cannot have any of the other uses. As opposed to the other uses, you can mix and match and have multiple classifications under one roof. Retailer, again, there's different subsets within retailer. The 2 main categories are a storefront retailer. This is typically open to the public, typically known as dispensaries. Or you also have a delivery only retailer, which is close to the public. Number 2, think of it as similar to an Amazon, where you make a request, it is delivered to the premises, but there is no foot activity in that premises. It's typically a request done by an app or through a phone transaction. Microbusiness allows you to have 3 of the following commercial activities: cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and or retail. Typically, it's smaller in scale if you want to have this umbrella. This is a list of different state license application requirements, just to give you some overview as to how actually it is very heavily regulated within the state. It would be our recommendation that if we implement a program in the city of Vernon, that at minimum, we adopt all of the state license regulations for 2 reasons. One is to ensure that we follow the state regulations and that we use those minimum requirements in our own applications, and so that we also can see the level of sophistication of these applicants. And secondly, is that if we allow them to go through a rigorous application program at the local level and they meet all those requirements, once they apply for the state license, it'll be a seamless process for them. That would be the hope and the intent. So just to go back, so, we would ask for a criminal state background of criminal convictions. We would ask for live scan fingerprints. We would have a set list of things that would disqualify them if we see anything in their criminal background. Assuming that whether they are a tenant or they are a property owner, we would upfront want to see that they have a legal right to occupy the premises. For example, if it's a tenant, we would want to see a copy of a lease or conditional lease should they get approved, along with a notarized approval of the property owner saying, yes, I'm aware of the city's ordinances and laws, and yes, I'm allowing my tenant to use my premises for this purpose. There is a requirement for a labor peace agreement. Should a applicant have more than 20 employees at that point, it triggers the requirement that they abide by a labor peace agreement. There's no consumption on the premises. They need to post a bond if they need to destroy some of the cannabises, if there's any violations. Obviously, that we would request very specific operating procedures depending on the specific classification. Other things that we would want to see based on state regulations is a specific diagram of the proposed premises, where you would have cultivation, where you would have storage, where you have an area for your employees. So all of that would be specific. We would also want to see who has a financial interest in the operation, and that be provided to the city of Vernon. Also, there are sensitive sites that the state has designated and a specific minimum requirement to have a 600-foot radius. Currently, the 3 designated sensitive sites are a school, daycare center, and youth center. Again, a local jurisdiction has the authority to specify a more restrictive radius and can increase it from the minimum 600. And you can also designate what other quote unquote sensitive sites the city wants to consider. These are just some other additional state requirements. One specifically is that we would want to ensure that any advertising or marketing is geared toward adults, nothing to attract children. So this is the authority for local jurisdictions. A local jurisdiction can either regulate it, allow all classifications. You can just limit it and only allow some classifications, or you can completely prohibit any commercial cannabis activity. Again, just because the state has minimum requirements doesn't mean that the local jurisdiction can be much more restrictive. Currently, the city has a citywide ban, right? So it's Vernon Municipal Code Section 26.4 indicates that no dispensary, store, co-op, or cultivation operation is permitted in any zone or overlay zone in the city of Vernon. So essentially, it's a citywide ban on commercial cannabis. Currently, in LA County, this is a list of the cities that currently regulate at least one cannabis license classification. Most recently, in November 2020, in LA County, 4 cities either passed a specific measure relating to a tax measure for cannabis businesses, or allowing some regulation that they submitted to the voters. Statewide, however, there were 21 other cities that introduced some form of cannabis-related regulation in their cities. So when this was first implemented back in 2016, there was very little information because it's taken a while for these industries to establish themselves and actually have concrete information. In order to provide the city of Vernon, now that we have about 4 to 5 years of aggregate data that we can actually have concrete information, we reached out to certain cities and asked specific questions to be able to share with the city of Vernon and see what lessons could be learned. For example, in the city of Linwood, 19 operators submitted, 19 applicants were approved for operation in the city. They allowed for 4 different type of classifications. Currently, only 6 businesses are operating. For their fiscal year 2019-2020, you can see up there the amounts. The cost recovery fee, that's a one-time fee for application fees. A quarterly fees, the last quarterly fee was $203,000. There are also transfer or change in ownership fees, and you see that amount there. One of the themes that we saw was that some of the obstacles or delays that the city were experiencing were some delays in the review process from LA County Fire Department. I will get to that because LA County Fire Department has provided us with their input. So to their credit, they have made changes to make their process smoother. And like, to be fair, with any industry or with any new program, there's always going to be certain hiccups in the beginning, but they are committed to make any improvements and be a partner with the city of Vernon should the city of Vernon move in this route. Important that the city of Linwood had indicated that there have been no public safety problems reported as a result of a legal commercial cannabis program. Here's another a list or examples of Montebello. 39 applications were received, 24 were approved. Currently, there are no concrete information regarding revenue sources to be able to share at this point. However, just on the interest level of submittal of application, the city collected 1.7 million in one-time application fees. They too did not report any public safety problems. Here's another example, the City of Commerce, 45 complete eligible applications were received, 23 operators were approved. Currently, 7 businesses are operating. As of December 31, 2020, here is a list of the revenue resources that they have received. So all in total, it's currently about 4.9 million. And specifically for ongoing operational and non-operational fees, it's 1.1 million. So the comment that they made is that subtracting the expenditures from the 4.9 million, the city has made a very healthy profit, and it has additionally been able to reinvest back to their city services. So some of the policy considerations, again, if the city is planning to implement, are what classifications will you allow? What are the review and approval process? What type of permitting process will be implemented? And what will be the application requirements? Also, what zones in the city would this be allowed? Would we stay with the 600-foot buffer distance? Would we designate additional sensitive sites? And what fee structure or tax structure would we want to impose? In any ordinance, we highly recommend that penalty provisions be in place. So if we have illegal operations, that the penalty provisions are strong and provide the city with enforcement tools, or if you have a legal operator that is not complying with their operational permits, that they also be penalized. Here is just a list of the type of fees or revenue sources that would be complete in a full program. It would include the processing / application fees. It would include the negotiated operating fees. This would be like the percentage of their gross revenues or a certain dollar amount based on square footage if it's a cultivation operation. One thing that we would recommend is implementing a requirement for the operators, the approved operators, to appropriate on an annual basis to a community benefit fund program. The beauty of the city of Vernon is that you already have an established program with the Vernon Community Fund. So this would be a way for them to partner with the city and give back to their community. And we also have the ability, because Vernon has utilities, to be able to increase the revenue source in this regard. This is just a list of the different state tax license, state taxes. These are some of the recommended main elements that we would want the city of Vernon to consider, or that we would recommend the city of Vernon to consider in implementing a program. And I pretty much discussed some of those in this session. One of the, basically would be indoor cultivation, manufacturing. If the city decides to go to the retail route, that it would be a non-storefront retail delivery, meaning that it would be closed to the public, that outdoor cultivation would be prohibited, festivals would be prohibited, dispensaries would be prohibited. For a licensing scheme, we would recommend an operational agreement to give the city the discretion to negotiate the operating fees, and that the approval process be on an objective, merit-based criteria system. So I'll go quickly in terms of the specific discussion topics that were raised, that these questions were raised to our office to further elaborate. This is just an overview as to how would the program look from point A to point B, from the point that the application, that an ordinance is approved, to the point of actually approving the applications. Like I said, the fire department made a commitment to support the city efforts. They indicated that they've made internal changes to improve their review and approval process. They've also developed documents to assist the public, which they have online, and including specific Regulation 30 that is specific to cannabis operators. So these are some of the recommendations that we would make to put some requirements both on the operators as well as city efforts. One of the things that we would recommend is let's have a workshop. Let's have a workshop for those applicants to ensure that they know exactly what is required of them. And in their operating agreements, have specific deadlines for them. We would also recommend imposing a non-operational monthly fee. So let's say they get all of the approvals, but they don't start moving forward to operating. This would give them an incentive to start their operations and not just sit on the licenses or the permits. Again, there was some inquiries or concerns about the transfers of licenses or permits. Some cities are changing their ownership structures because either they want to have more investors come in, or they just say, you know what, I just want to sell the city approvals or licenses. what we would recommend is that any transfer would not happen unless the city approves it, and that the new proposed owners would go through the same rigorous application process. There were other concerns about how do we safeguard the approval process, right? And so here are some lists of how we would do that in terms of the application and selection process. For example, all applicants, they would have to go through criminal background checks. If the city hires outside consultants or contractors such as planners, they would have to have a non-collusion affidavit and also have declarations of their potential criminal convictions, as well as submit a non-collusion affidavit. Assuming we limit the number of applications or decide not to limit, then we would ensure that only those top ranked that scored high would be able to fill in those slots. Regarding who would be reviewing the applications, a recommendation is that we have a confidential panel selected by the city administrator, where they would also have to commit to not having any financial conflicts. And obviously we would want these panel members to have some level of expertise, whether it's financing, cannabis, planning, or land use. There were also inquiries raised as to what are the pros and cons of having city council be the body that would have the final authority of the approvals process and selection process. You know, the pros, obviously, they are the legislative body that they are authorized to make these type of final decisions from a policy-making standpoint. If they rely on the merit-based objective criteria, then their final decision is based on that. A couple of cons to this is that we would not be able to insulate them from being contacted by applicants or being lobbied by consultants in an industry that is very highly competitive and lucrative. And obviously, you know, if they make a final decision not based on the merit-based objective criteria, then the process is more susceptible to legal challenge. Obviously, the city council at any time during this process has the ability to provide their policy preferences to implement in this program. For example, you know, they can say, well, we want to say that a percentage of their local hires are from the city of Vernon, or they already have an established business relationship with the city of Vernon, such as they have a business here or they have properties in the city of Vernon. We can give them bonus points in the objective scoring criteria for those type of policy preferences. Ultimately, the city attorney's office and staff will take their direction from city council. This is, you know, two ways that the city of Vernon can remain competitive with attracting applicants in comparison to other cities. One is their operating fee structure. Currently, we have information from other cities as to what other cities are charging. So now we can use that data to say, let's be more competitive. Let's have lower rates, but have the ability to have the discretion to make those changes based on relevant factors or the market. Also, inherently, the city is industrial by nature. What we've seen is that typically it is residents that may have some questions or concerns. So that is diminished in the city of Vernon. I'm not sure if Dan is online, but I have the ability to provide you with a map of what the city generated, just to give you a quick overview of where in the city of Vernon we would be able to authorize businesses based on sensitive sites. So here is a map showing in green of where where the area allowed for cannabis businesses. This takes into account schools, daycare centers, youth centers. It also, if we were to designate residences as well as churches, and being a good neighbor to our surrounding cities and keeping in mind their residences, their youth centers, their schools. So as you can see, all of the green area is where that would be allowed. So unless you have specific questions, I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. Then there's some other pros and cons about limiting the number of licenses, the pros and cons. One of the cons that we've seen is that if you limit the amount, those specific premises, there is an ability to increase the lease amounts and also the sale of the property. So while this may be lucrative for the property owners, it may artificially increase the costs or the prices of properties, and may increase the comparables. So that's an unintended consequence for future developments. A main pro of limiting the number is that we can treat it as a quote unquote pilot program, ease into the program and reassess at a later time. We've been tasked to look at what options we have with the property that the city owns up in Kern County. So that's still in development. So at this point, that concludes my presentation. So the options for this body is that you can receive and file this presentation, or if there's any specific direction that you want to provide our office or city staff, or any issues that you want to discuss or any concerns you have, we will gladly take that and report that back to City Council. And Arnold, I don't know if you have any comments in this regard?
No, Norma, thank you. Again, we are open to hearing the feedback from the commission. Any questions you might have. Again, we have been working very closely with the city administrator's office and city staff to try to identify and flesh out as many issues as we possibly can. So, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions or comments, we're happy to address those.
Yeah, I have, okay. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I think Williams had it first, if he wants to go first.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Okay, sorry, Doug. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. I'm Douglas Williams. I had the luxury of listening in earlier in the week to the presentation by the city attorney's office with regard to this matter at the city council meeting a couple of days ago. I've reviewed the presentation as it was presented today in its form, and I've got a couple of comments as it relates to the industry generally and to Vernon's approach to this specifically.
Chair, if I may. Sorry, but before we go into comments, we did receive public comment on this item, and I'm not sure if any hands are raised. If he's asking questions, that's fine. But if he's going to comment, we should do the public comment first.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now we'll take public comment from the members of the audience. So Douglas, we'll get to you right after this.
Very well.
So it doesn't appear as if we have any hands raised from attendees. Is that true? Okay, but we did receive an email from Richard Friedman which was forwarded to the commission previously, but I'll read it into the record. Hello, Lisa. Thank you very much for sending this email. I've reviewed the BIC meeting information and the 2 Vernon City Council meetings and videos, and I'm very interested in the potential change in regulations for cannabis production. It appears my building qualifies in the permissible zone, and I believe would be an excellent candidate for this type of operation. I will follow the process forward, as I have been extremely interested in this opportunity since the first time I contacted the city in 2017 and was put on the notification list. Please add me to any additional lists, notification emails, so that I may become further involved. Kindest regards, Richard Friedman.
Okay, is that the end of the public comments?
We do have a, oh, no. Can we just check the attendees one more time? That's it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Douglas, please.
Thank you. My perspective on it as a commissioner and a stakeholder in Vernon is the following. One is the cannabis industry is legal in the state of California. And in my opinion, the city of Vernon should, in fact and in scope, present a inviting environment to business and industry to locate their businesses within the city of Vernon and extract out the labyrinth of regulatory restrictions, conditions, and other elements that other cities have, which were presented, and open up the city to the ability for these businesses to locate here. It is a legal business. It is a legal industry. It was overwhelmingly approved by the voters of California several years ago. It is on the dais, excuse me, it's on the docket federally, and could be and should be legalized on a national basis. It's my opinion, and I want to make it as clear as I can, that the restrictive environment should be removed to enable Vernon to entice and invite industry into the city. This is a 21st century industry, and it uses power 24 hours a day in a legal environment. What I saw the city attorney put together in its scope and in its detail, as excellent as it is, presents more restrictive environment than it does in an invitation environment. So I would be very cautious to overtax, overregulate, and disinvite through application processes and background checks and so forth and so on, as it relates to who it is that's going to be doing this, as long as they are a viable corporation within the city and within the state of California and have the financial wherewithal to do this. The barrier of entry should be moderated so that Vernon will have a much more greater chance of bringing in long-term owners, tenants, and manufacturers into our city with regard to this industry. That's all I have to say on this matter right now.
All right. Thank you, Douglas. Jimmy, I guess you were next up.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the presentation by the interim city attorney in office. It was very thorough, it was very informative. I would say that I agree with Douglas, and I think that we need to, I think we're behind the 8 ball here. I think, we need to move forward on this and have very little delay, I think, in allowing this legal, again, industry into our city. We are an industrial city, and we are very uniquely positioned to not have issues with this type of an operation in our city. I also agree in principle that we should attempt to deregulate it as much as possible in an effort to entice business into the city of Vernon. And I think seeing some of the presentation and how high the fees and community, benefit funds and utility funds and all this, I don't think this industry should bear the brunt of the fact that we don't have enough money to cover everything that we're trying to do in Vernon. Though I agree every business should contribute, I think having, these licensing fees and then ongoing profit fees and then this community benefit fund and then utility fees, I think that is absolutely insane and way overstepping the bounds of what government should be doing in regulating business. I think the only departure I have from Douglas's comments are, I am supportive of background checks and stuff of that nature. And I do support the city's move to kind of prohibit these locations within 600 feet of residences, churches, as well as the state mandated sensitive sites. I think we still have a huge area of Vernon that is capable of holding these without inconveniencing any of the residents living here. And I think that it's something that probably most of us can stand behind. So, I'm supportive of it. And I really, in my opinion, think staff should be moving much quicker to get this implemented and available within our city, before businesses move elsewhere. And if we can entice them by having better fee structures and better regulation or lack thereof, I should say, to get them into the city, I think that would be very beneficial since we are so uniquely positioned. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jimmy. Do we have any other hands up?
I have a question. This is Duncan Sachdeva. Firstly, I am glad that the city is moving forward with this, and I definitely support the city's decision to accept this industry and make it like legal in this regard. I would like to say that the city needs to be more competitive in inviting this these sorts of businesses in comparison to the other cities. I did note that, for example, in Linwood, Montebello, and the City of Commerce, 19, 39, and 45 applicants were received. However, only 6, 2, and 7 are operating currently. Even though a lot more were approved. I wonder why the number of applicants that were approved versus how many are currently operating, why is there such a difference? Do we have any information on that? And then another thing is, if we are limiting, let's say, a certain number of applicants to apply, for manufacture, cultivation, and so on and so forth, is this application process, once it's opened, is it open for a certain amount of time and then are we done with it? Is that it? Are these grandfathered in companies now that will only operate, or will this be an ongoing process? Let's say 2, 3, 8 years from now, will other businesses that want to move in, will they be able to apply for new licenses? Thank you.
Okay, great. I guess I would like to comment. In Montebello and Commerce, we've had a number of cannabis operations go in. I think, as Duncan, you just mentioned, it's a very interesting thing how they struggle. Largely, I believe, because the cities are not geared up to be efficient with an industry like Vernon is. And to Jimmy and Doug's point, Vernon is perfectly set up to quickly process and move forward and get, like we do, where regular businesses are able to open fairly quickly because we're so effective in the city of Vernon, at our building department, in our planning department. Everything's very set up well. And I think just because these other cities are not, these cannabis businesses struggle for months and some years so far in Montebello and Commerce, because the city is not set up to make a very smooth process. Another comment that I'll make is on the regulatory side, not just, you know, the application, which I do think it's important to screen folks because there's a whole large component of that industry, because it's not regulated, they're not run by effective professionals. So I don't necessarily mind reasonably substantial application fees, just so you can vet and work with folks that are good business people. And there are a number of good business people that I've run into in those other cities that are up and operating and hire professional architects to do their work. But as far as the other part of the process, when they have kind of a dark committee, I find that challenging, you know, because every one of the businesses then has to hire the right consultant who has the right connection, and I'm very opposed to those concepts. And that's anytime you limit the number of licenses that you will allow. I think, frankly, if any licensee, any application qualifies based on the ultimate criteria, I don't believe you should limit that number. I think that we're not smart enough to say who's going to win and who's going to lose in each one of those categories of business. So I would be very, very cautious in creating any kind of limitations in terms of numbers. This industry will go through its ups and downs. The cultivation side of the industry, I think, you know, it's going to have to consolidate to a certain extent. But the manufacturers, you know, the edibles, you know, these guys are just like the food manufacturers we have right now, and we're perfectly set up to you know, oversee them, license them, and proceed with them. And then lastly, again, as maybe Doug and Jimmy pointed on, there's a big margin for cities in these industries. And I think that you've seen, you know, in Montebello, a lot of the delay was negotiating what the percentage the city gets, because they wanted an extra half point on their gross. And so that delay of negotiation, it caused a lot of folks who were licensed but did not have that deal in place, that delayed it. So I think now that we know what our competitive cities are, we've got competitive power, we can actually approve power and put power in quickly, because that's another issue that these other folks have is Edison, you know, you're 9 months before you're gonna upgrade. And I don't mean to take so much time, but I am familiar with this stuff. But I think that, you know, Vernon's well-positioned, you know, make a substantial discount from what these other cities are charging in terms of their ongoing, you know, gross receipt percentages, and, you know, light it up. I don't see that there's any reason not to. I mean, it's a terrific opportunity for the city, and I don't know that it's a bad thing we've waited so long. I think that now that we know so much about how other folks have done it and have executed it poorly but are still successful at it, I think it's a great opportunity for us to craft the right process and system. And I don't believe that it should be a favoritism or a who you know consultant or a city council approval. It's here's the criteria, they qualify just like any other business in the city of Vernon. So last of my comments.
And Chair, if I may address some of the questions raised, may I?
Well, can we have Douglas comment again? He has his hand up, and then you can round him up.
Jack, this is Tom Condon. I'd like to make a couple of comments after Doug, please.
Okay, go ahead, Douglas.
Thank you very much. The one comment that I failed to bring up earlier is that this is not in my opinion exclusively, this is not a social justice industry, and the fees, the taxes, the profits, the entrepreneurial energies should not be impeded under a social justice contract where specific revenues or specific percentages of profitability go to social justice or social engineering criteria. This is a business just as any other business. And if we start as a city, start tinkering around with this as if it is a RFP that many of us have filled out to do business with municipalities, that the criteria is so restrictive and so onerous and social justice and demographically designed to be a labyrinth to go through. The big guys are going to move out, and they're going to build out in the middle of the desert, massive factories to do this because it's a legal business. So I think we have to be very mindful that there are very many smart people who are ready to do this, given the opportunity to do so in an environment that is inviting. Thank you, Jack.
Tom?
Yes, thank you. I like what I'm hearing from everyone on the commission. I like the idea of this being more free market than closed. So I'm gung-ho about it. A couple of comments that I would just like to make from a personal standpoint that I've experienced. And if I'm getting into it minutia, I apologize for that. But I can remember, maybe pre-COVID being at a client's office in the city of Vernon over on Downey Road. And, just having a meeting. And then while I was sitting in that meeting, one of his gals walked back in from being outside, maybe smoking a cigarette as opposed to a joint. And I could smell marijuana. And when she walked by us, I said to the owner of the company, I said, man, that gal must have just smoked some pot. And I left, I walked outside, and I realized that it wasn't that she had smoked a joint outside, but across the street on Downey Road over on Maywood Avenue in Maywood, right across the tracks, there's a manufacturer. And so when I walked out, the whole area just smelled like skunk. And so then I realized that was where that was emanating from. Another point I'd like to make is last week over in the City of Commerce, on Friday afternoon, I came out of a client's, I went into to a meeting on Bandini Boulevard in the City of Commerce, where there are a couple of active manufacturing plants operating. And I smelt a little bit of the skunk when I went in, but then when I came back out into the reception area, the area was overwhelmed with the skunk smell. And so I think, and I don't know, I got to believe that can be mitigated because this is happening all over the state illegally and they hide it. But I think that's a concern. And I think as much as Vernon is set up to do this, and we're perfectly, we're a better industrial city than these cities around us. I think that we also have to realize that within the community of Vernon, people live there essentially at their offices, in their buildings. And so I just think if we're going to allow this to go throughout the city, instead of putting it in a zone, I think we have to really be considerate of that aspect of the whole thing. The other thing that I'd like to mention too is, in the City of Commerce, they had that, they approved these licenses. We had the election in November, and the City of Commerce, the population voted down, I think 7 or 8 licenses that were going to be transferred, and they lost within the community. And I also want to mention too, the reason I kind of like the idea of having it open, because within the City of Commerce, you could have one property owner who has the marijuana manufacturing taking place because someone was able to get one of those hard sought after licenses, but then the guy that's next to him has to live with what's happening next door, but he's at a disadvantage because there's no way for him to compete from a property value standpoint. And I would also say this, if you are next to someone who is manufacturing marijuana or cultivating it and it smelled like hell, your property value is going to go down. The ability for you to lease that property to a garment company, that has clothing or something like that, it's gonna, people might turn and walk away from your building because of the odor. And Jack, you and I have seen that in the city of Vernon along Bandini over all these years in the rendering zones. So it happens and it's real. And I think, I think what you gentlemen have talked about in terms of free market, keeping it open, et cetera, I think that's a real positive. So those kind of situations don't take place. But I really hate the smell. Personally, I hate the smell, and we smell it everywhere. Now you drive home and you go through downtown and you get on the freeway and it's everywhere. And I don't think that's fair to do to people in Vernon. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, Jimmy.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with a brief comment on that. I definitely appreciate that there are odor issues out there that exist in the environment. There's a plethora of companies that cause them. There happens to be a trash company not too far from Vernon that creates terrible odors when I'm driving by on my way to and from the office. But at the same time, I also want to point out that we also allow people to smoke in public cigarettes, which is not only an unpleasant smell, but it is also hazardous to other people's health. And that goes, there's some regulations with it, but it's relatively open to do out in the public. So, there's a lot of things to consider that we need to be careful about going too deep into the weeds and favoritism and stuff like that. So just my 2 cents.
All right, thank you. Okay, Norma, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to briefly address some of the questions that were raised. There was a question as why are they not operating? So, just to be fair to some of the cities that we discussed here and their specifics, from my experience, they have been very committed and business friendly to the operators. So, I think the benefit that we have is we can learn from their growing pains if they're improving the process. And I believe some of those comments were echoed. But the main thing that we've noticed as to why they're not operating is they get stuck with the approval process, with building and safety, with planning, with the fire department. So I think that's why it's very important that we have those workshops so that we are business friendly and guide them from A through Z. I think Vernon has the benefit that you have all of those departments in-house as opposed to some other cities that contract those services out. And some of the times I wish they would hire, the project manager that has these experiences of going through those type of plan review approval process. I think that would expedite the process. And because I agree that there's only going to be a percentage of them that will actually start operating from A through Z. And so if you don't limit it, at least you still will have a good amount of operators up and running. So I do agree with that point, just based on what I've experienced. Concerning the requirements that we've discussed, like I said, I think I've just been mirroring or echoing what the state requirements are to prove that there's this conception that this industry is not regulated, and it's actually very heavily regulated by the state. So what we would be proposing is that we adopt those state application requirements, because while they are rigorous in the state, if they go through the process at this point, once they apply to the state, they've already gone through that process, and we're hoping that it would be seamless to them. So I don't, at least the direction is, I don't think we're trying to focus on making it too restrictive, but just so that they have a successful process with the state. As to being competitive, I think having the benefit of what the other cities are currently charging with, their community benefit fund or their operating fees, I think that's a great point, that we can be competitive by reducing that amount. And I believe that was the only thing, those are the comments that I wanted to address. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Do we have any Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Baca. I got one question for the assistant or the city attorney. When you said that to make it easier to go through the state regulations, so even if we try to make it less restrictive for the city, they would still have to meet the state requirements, right?
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I had.
Okay. Let's see. Let's
Can I just make one more comment? This is Carlos.
sure.
So what we're going to be doing next is our staff working with the city attorney's office. We're going to engage and do 2 public town hall meetings. One will be around noonish and the other one will be at nighttime. They will be through Zoom, and we're trying to get those accomplished within the next 45 days. So I think we have dates. Lisa can give those dates out, and then we're going to invite the public to attend those meetings where we'll give out information as well. We will take your recommendations today, work with the city attorney's office, and report back to city council with the discussions that we had. And lastly, I just want to say that also that the city attorney's office has also been tasked with starting an ordinance. However, it's a shell of an ordinance, and we are hopeful that we can get something in front of city council within the next 45 to 60 days.
So the first cannabis town hall meeting is scheduled for February 22nd at 11:30 a.m. And the second one is scheduled for March 4th at 7 p.m. And those will be conducted via Zoom.
Okay, terrific. Let's see, lost my spot.
Jack?
Yes.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Now, my understanding is that the cannabis industry is mostly on cash basis. From what I have read for the last few years in the news, banks usually don't open bank accounts if you're in the
I'm sorry, Duncan, you're breaking up.
cannabis industries. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Sorry.
Okay, so and also if the leaseholders go out and rent warehousing or distribution centers for this, the leases are usually more expensive, because there's more risk involved, since it is still a federal, the feds still don't allow it. States do, but feds don't. And also the insurance costs are higher, and also the sales tax and county taxes and all of that for these industries, from what I read in the past, were also being collected in cash. So what I want to know is, will the city of Vernon, will they also collect cash in taxes or fees, or just some questions basically?
Yeah, that's a great question, because my understanding is the city of Los Angeles has a cash, well, I don't know what they did this year, but they had cash windows where they were collecting millions of dollars on the day of pay in cash. And guys were lined up with backpacks and essentially suitcases full of cash. Most landlords I know do not accept cash for concerns of being involved in a criminal enterprise, but that you would want to talk to your attorney. And so you might end up one folk on a $250,000 payment, they received, I think it was 500 money orders. I mean, it's so that they had, at least they weren't depositing cash into their accounts. So there's all kinds of issues there in Vernon's collection of these fees. I'm not sure how Commerce or Montebello actually did it, but I know City of LA was collecting cash. So.
Norma, do you want to touch upon that, that issue?
Sure. I know that all of the cities at this point are collecting cash. I believe the city of Linwood has a system where they reinforced some ability so that if cash is collected, appointments are made at that time. I know that for one of the cities, when the city was depositing cash amounts, we did get a call from the bank making inquiry. You know, we're noticing a pattern of these high cash deposits. Can you explain? The explanation was the state of California has allowed this industry. The state has its own ordinance regulating this legal industry. Here is our copy of our ordinance. And pursuant to that, those obligations, these are the payments being made to the city X. The banks accepted that explanation and haven't made any inquiries again.
Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, and I believe Montebello, recognizing that at some point, altered their collection process to require cashier's checks, so that put the burden on the applicant to take the cash and get a cashier's check that they would pay to the city.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, it's obviously one of the things that Vernon has to figure out on how to do it. Okay, so does the commission wish to pull item 3 from the consent calendar? I'm not quite sure what that.
So we're moving on to the consent calendar, and there's only one item on the consent calendar. So that's item 3. If the commission's okay with proceeding, a motion would be in order to approve the consent calendar, or if somebody would like to talk about the minutes of November 12th, that item should be pulled from the consent calendar.
Okay, are there any public comments for the consent calendar? And if not, may I have a motion for the consent calendar item number 3?
There are no public comments.
So moved.
I'm sorry, can you state your name?
Sorry, Commissioner, Vice Chair Andrioli.
Is there a second?
Davis.
Seconded, Commissioner Baca.
Motion by Vice Chair Andrioli, seconded by Commissioner Baca to approve the consent calendar. I will call the roll. Chair Klein?
Approved.
Vice Chair Andrioli?
Approved.
Commissioner Baca?
Approved.
Commissioner Condon?
Approved.
Commissioner Davis?
Approved.
Commissioner Saktova?
Approved.
Commissioner Williams?
Approved.